Are you ready to fall asleep with 100 interesting facts from 1950 America? Let's begin. 1. Cost of groceries. Bread, milk, eggs. In 1950s America, the grocery store looked and felt very different from the supermarkets we know today. Small neighborhood shops often served families who stopped by several times a week, since refrigerators were still modest in size. Prices reflected the post-war abundance, when wages were rising but many staples were still remarkably inexpensive. A loaf of bread often cost around 14 cents, and a dozen eggs hovered near 55 cents. A gallon of milk, delivered right to your doorstep in a glass bottle, averaged about 82 cents. While these numbers seem almost unbelievable today, it's important to remember that the average household income was also much lower, with many families living comfortably on less than $4,000 a year. Shopping was often a social ritual, where clerks knew their customers by name and sometimes extended credit if needed. Grocery bags were packed in paper, and choices were far fewer than the overwhelming shelves of brands available now. Yet for many Americans, the 1950s grocery store represented security, abundance, and the simple satisfaction of putting wholesome food on the family table at a time when prosperity was becoming the national story. 2. Gasoline price per gallon. Few things symbolized 1950s America more than the car, and with it came the ritual of filling up at the local service station. Gasoline prices were astonishingly low by today's standards, averaging around 20 to 25 cents per gallon during the decade. This affordability helped fuel the love affair with the open road, where long drives and family vacations became part of middle-class life. Service stations themselves were more than just fuel stops. Attendants in crisp uniforms would pump the gas, check your oil, and clean the windshield, all with a friendly smile. Bright neon signs, often in the shape of iconic logos like Texaco's star or Shell's scallop, lit up roadways at night. Cheap gas encouraged suburban families to buy a second car, and teenagers often saved just enough money to cruise around town with friends. The low cost per gallon made spontaneous drives possible and embedded the automobile into daily culture. In many ways, the American identity of freedom, mobility, and independence was tied directly to a time when a pocketful of change could keep your tank full and your wheels turning on the endless highways of the 1950s. 3. Average home price. The dream of home ownership flourished in the 1950s. After the hardships of the Great Depression and World War II, millions of Americans longed for stability and comfort, and the suburban house became a powerful symbol of that aspiration. In 1950, the average home price in the United States was just over $7,000. By the end of the decade, as demand rose and the middle class expanded, the average climbed closer to $12,000. Mortgages became more accessible through government programs like the GI Bill, which provided veterans with affordable financing. These homes were often modest by today's standards: 2 or 3 bedrooms, a single bathroom, and a tidy yard with space for children to play. Kitchens boasted new appliances, living rooms centered around the family's first television, and basements sometimes doubled as recreation rooms. More than just shelter, these houses represented belonging to the post-war American story of growth. Suburbs spread outward from cities at a rapid pace, offering young families a chance to plant roots. For many, the 1950s home was a castle, modest yet filled with the optimism of a generation determined to build a better, more comfortable future. 4. Suburban boom and Levittown. No single development symbolizes the suburban boom of the 1950s more than Levittown. Built in New York after World War II, it became a model for mass-produced housing. Rows of nearly identical homes spread across farmland, creating communities that promised affordability and modern living for thousands of returning soldiers and their families. By using assembly line techniques adapted from industry, developer William Levitt was able to build houses at remarkable speed and low cost. Levittown's neighborhoods featured winding streets, schools, shopping centers, and parks, creating a complete suburban environment. Other regions quickly followed, giving rise to countless suburbs across America. This movement wasn't just about architecture. It represented a cultural shift toward family-centered living, away from crowded urban areas. Children grew up playing in safe yards, while parents commuted to city jobs along newly built highways. The suburban dream became closely linked with prosperity, order, and the idea of upward mobility. Though not without its social limitations, Levittown left an enduring mark on American geography and culture. The 1950s suburb was more than a place to live. It was the embodiment of a new way of life that defined the decade. 5. The rise of diners. Diners became iconic symbols of American life in the 1950s, often shining like beacons along highways and in small towns. Their stainless steel exteriors, neon signs, and cozy booths invited travelers, workers, and families alike. Diners offered affordable meals, served quickly, catering to a population that was increasingly mobile. Menus featured hearty staples: hamburgers, club sandwiches, meatloaf, and, of course, endless cups of coffee. Breakfast specials, eggs, bacon, and pancakes were available all day, reinforcing the diner's reputation as a welcoming place at any hour. Teenagers gathered after school or after a night at the movies, while truckers found them reliable stops during long hauls. Diners also became part of the pop culture image of the era, appearing in films, photographs, and advertisements as quintessentially American. The jukebox in the corner played the latest rock and roll hits, turning meals into mini social events. With their mix of chrome, formica, and friendliness, diners provided a democratic space where different walks of life could share the same counter. More than just restaurants, they were a comforting constant in a rapidly changing society, embodying the warmth and familiarity of 1950s American dining. 6. Soda fountains as teen hangouts. For many teenagers in the 1950s, the soda fountain was the place to be. Often located inside drugstores or diners, these counters offered more than just ice cream, sodas, and milkshakes. They were vibrant social hubs, filled with chatter, laughter, and the clink of glassware. A soda fountain menu included sundaes, root beer floats, and the ever-popular chocolate malt. Prices were low enough for teenagers to spend their allowance on a sweet treat while listening to the latest hits on a tabletop jukebox. These establishments became key gathering places where young people could socialize outside of school or home. The soda jerk, usually a cheerful young man in a white cap and apron, became a familiar figure behind the counter, expertly crafting towering desserts. In an era when teen culture was emerging as a powerful force, soda fountains provided a safe, light-hearted venue for independence. Parents appreciated the wholesome environment, while teens valued the chance to meet friends, flirt, and feel part of something uniquely theirs. The soda fountain captured the carefree spirit of youth, creating memories that many would cherish long after the era faded. 7. Mail-order catalogs in households. Before the rise of giant department stores and online shopping, the mail-order catalog was a household staple. In the 1950s, companies like Sears, Roebuck & Co. or Montgomery Ward delivered thick catalogs that arrived like seasonal treasures. Families flipped through glossy pages filled with everything from clothing and furniture to bicycles and even entire house kits. For rural families, catalogs provided access to products they could not find locally, bridging the gap between city and countryside. Children often circled toys they hoped to receive for Christmas, while parents compared prices on new appliances or tools. Ordering was simple: fill out a form, send payment by mail, and wait for delivery. Catalogs also mirrored the changing trends of the decade, showcasing the latest fashions, home decor styles, and modern conveniences. In many homes, the catalog doubled as a wish book, a source of inspiration for what the good life could look like. The ritual of browsing and ordering connected families to the broader national economy, making them feel part of a growing consumer culture. In the 1950s, a catalog wasn't just a shopping tool, it was a window into a rapidly modernizing America. 8. Family ownership of cars. The 1950s cemented the automobile as an essential part of American family life. For the first time, owning a car was not just a luxury but a standard expectation. By mid-decade, more than 75% of American families had at least one car in the driveway, and many households aspired to a second. Automakers like Ford, Chevrolet, and Chrysler competed fiercely, offering stylish models with sweeping tail fins, chrome detailing, and new color choices that reflected optimism and individuality. Cars were tied to status, freedom, and the new suburban lifestyle, where commutes and errands required reliable transportation. For teenagers, the family car became a passport to independence, cruising the main street, attending dances, or heading to drive-in theaters. Road trips blossomed as a form of recreation, made possible by affordable gas and expanding highways. Families packed coolers, unfolded paper maps, and set off to see the country. The car was more than transportation. It was an extension of the home, often equipped with picnic baskets, radios, and space for the whole family. In the 1950s, cars didn't just carry people, they carried dreams, adventures, and the promise of the open road. 9. Rise of the backyard barbecue. The backyard barbecue became a hallmark of suburban life in the 1950s, reflecting the era's emphasis on family, community, and leisure. With spacious yards in newly built suburbs, families embraced outdoor living, especially during warm summer evenings. Affordable charcoal grills, often simple kettle designs, made cooking outside easy and fun. Hamburgers, hot dogs, and corn on the cob became staples of these gatherings, accompanied by potato salad and homemade lemonade. Neighbors often joined in, creating informal block parties where friendships flourished. Barbecues symbolized a new kind of domestic pride, entertaining guests under the stars while showcasing the modern suburban home. Men frequently took charge of the grill, sometimes humorously dubbed the king of the barbecue, while women prepared side dishes indoors. Children played nearby with hula hoops or bicycles, their laughter mixing with the smell of sizzling food. The barbecue represented more than a meal. It was a ritual of connection, hospitality, and celebration of the good life. In many ways, the simple act of grilling in the backyard reflected the optimism of the 1950s, when families gathered with confidence in the bright future ahead. 10. Household gadgets becoming common: toasters, refrigerators. The 1950s marked a revolution in household convenience, as new appliances and gadgets transformed daily chores. Refrigerators became standard in most homes, replacing older iceboxes and giving families the ability to store food longer and shop less often. Toasters, once a novelty, became common kitchen staples, delivering golden brown slices at the push of a lever. Washing machines and dryers, once luxuries, spread rapidly, reducing the burden of laundry day. Vacuum cleaners, blenders, and electric mixers brought a sense of modern efficiency to housework. Advertisements emphasized the joy and ease of using these tools, often portraying smiling homemakers, proudly demonstrating the latest technology. For many families, acquiring an appliance was not just about convenience. It was about participating in the modern American dream. Gadgets also became symbols of progress, showcasing the nation's post-war innovation and consumer confidence. Children marveled at the hum of the refrigerator or the whir of the blender, while parents appreciated the time saved. These appliances didn't just make life easier, they reshaped daily routines and redefined what it meant to live in comfort. By the end of the decade, the modern kitchen had become a powerful emblem of 1950s progress. Meanwhile, in the world of entertainment. 11. Opening of Disneyland. In July 1955, Disneyland opened its gates in Anaheim, California, and forever changed the landscape of family entertainment. Walt Disney envisioned a park where parents and children could enjoy rides and attractions together, in a clean, imaginative setting. The opening day was a grand affair, though not without hiccups. Temperatures soared, asphalt softened under the heat, and some rides broke down, but visitors still felt the magic of a new kind of amusement park. Unlike traveling carnivals or noisy fairgrounds, Disneyland offered carefully themed lands: Adventureland, Frontierland, Fantasyland, and Tomorrowland, each designed with storytelling in mind. Families could step into fairy tales, ride a riverboat, or glimpse a futuristic world of rockets and monorails. Tickets were affordable, and the experience quickly became a cultural phenomenon, drawing guests from across the nation. For many Americans, the 1950s trip to Disneyland became a treasured memory of childhood. It wasn't just about rides, it was about entering a world where imagination felt real and dreams seemed possible. Walt Disney's vision grew beyond a theme park. It became a symbol of mid-century optimism, capturing the spirit of wonder that defined the decade. 12. First color television broadcasts. The 1950s marked a milestone in media with the introduction of color television broadcasts. While black and white sets dominated the decade, color technology represented an exciting glimpse into the future. In 1951, CBS aired the first commercial color broadcast, though it wasn't until the mid-1950s that the technology began to spread more widely. By 1954, NBC was showcasing programs like the Tournament of Roses parade in vibrant hues, captivating audiences eager for a new viewing experience. Owning a color TV was initially expensive, with sets costing several $100s, a significant sum at the time. so most families continued to watch in black and white. Still, department stores placed color sets in their windows, drawing crowds who marveled at the novelty. Programs such as variety shows, sporting events, and children's programs benefited most, as colorful costumes and scenery added to the spectacle. Although color television wouldn't fully dominate until the 1960 seconds, its arrival in the 1950s reflected the era's fascination with technology and progress. For families who gathered around their living rooms, even hearing about color broadcasts stirred excitement, as if the magic of movies was beginning to enter the home one program at a time. 13. Popular radio shows fading. During the 1930s and 1940s, radio was the centerpiece of American home entertainment. Families gathered to listen to comedies, dramas, variety hours, and news programs. But by the 1950s, this golden age of radio was fading, replaced by the rapid rise of television. Programs like The Lone Ranger, Amos and Andy, and The Jack Benny Show transitioned or ended, because audiences now preferred watching performers rather than just hearing them. Radio stations adapted by focusing more on music, news, and talk formats, paving the way for the birth of modern radio as we know it. The portability of transistor radios also gave listeners new freedom, allowing teenagers to carry their favorite stations wherever they went. Though some lamented the loss of shared family evenings around the radio, others embraced the change. Radio didn't disappear. Instead, it reinvented itself for a new era. By the end of the decade, DJs and top 40 formats were in full swing, setting the stage for rock and roll's explosive impact. The shift marked not only the decline of old traditions but also the beginning of new ones that would define youth culture in America. 14. Elvis Presley's debut single. In 1954, a young singer from Memphis named Elvis Presley recorded a song that would change popular music forever. His debut single, That's All Right, blended rhythm and blues with country influences, creating a sound that felt fresh and electrifying. Released by Sun Records, the track quickly gained local attention, with DJs playing it repeatedly due to popular demand. By 1956, Elvis was a national sensation, appearing on television programs like The Ed Sullivan Show and thrilling audiences with his energetic performances. His unique voice, charismatic presence, and bold dance moves captured the imagination of teenagers while alarming more conservative adults. Elvis represented a cultural shift, embodying the rebellious spirit of youth in the 1950s. His music wasn't just entertainment, it became a generational anthem, introducing rock and roll to mainstream America. Record sales skyrocketed, and Elvis soon became known as the king of rock and roll. For many, hearing that first single was a moment of awakening, signaling that music could be exciting, daring, and transformative. The story of Elvis's debut wasn't only about a song, it was about the beginning of an entirely new era in American culture. 15. Marilyn Monroe's cultural rise. Few figures define 1950s Hollywood as clearly as Marilyn Monroe. Born Norma Jean Mortensen, she transformed into one of the most iconic stars of the century. By the mid-1950s, films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and The 7-Year Itch established her as both a glamorous screen presence and a beloved celebrity. Audiences were captivated by her combination of vulnerability, charm, and beauty, while magazines and advertisements placed her image everywhere, from calendars to billboards. Monroe embodied the allure of Hollywood, yet her appeal went beyond appearance. She represented the shifting roles of women in American culture, confident, playful, and independent, though often framed through the lens of mid-century ideals. Her famous subway dress scene in The 7-Year Itch, where fabric billows around her as she stands over a grate, became one of the most recognizable images of the decade. Monroe's rise was meteoric, and while her life was complex and often challenging, her 1950s career reflected America's fascination with celebrity, fantasy, and the power of cinema. To many, she was not only a star but also a symbol of the optimism and glamour that defined the era. 16. Drive-in theaters boom. The 1950s were the golden age of the drive-in theater. With cars becoming central to family life and leisure, these outdoor cinemas offered an experience that perfectly matched the culture of the time. By the mid-1950s, there were more than 4,000 drive-ins across the United States, often located on the edges of towns where land was plentiful. Families packed into cars with blankets and snacks, while teenagers saw drive-ins as places for dates or nights out with friends. Admission prices were affordable, usually charged per car, making them accessible entertainment for large families. The giant outdoor screens, often accompanied by playgrounds for children, turned moviegoing into an event. Concession stands sold popcorn, sodas, and hot dogs, adding to the festive atmosphere. Drive-ins also reflected the social changes of the decade, offering a more casual, community-centered alternative to traditional theaters. For many, the glow of the screen under the stars became an unforgettable memory of summer nights. Though their popularity would eventually decline with changing times, in the 1950s the drive-in was at its peak, representing both innovation and the enduring magic of the movies. 17. I Love Lucy on TV. Television in the 1950s would not be the same without I Love Lucy. Premiering in 1951, the sitcom starred Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, and it quickly became a cultural phenomenon. The show followed the antics of Lucy Ricardo, a spirited housewife with big dreams of stardom, often leading to comedic misadventures. Audiences adored Lucy's physical comedy, expressive face, and perfect timing, while the dynamic between her and Ricky Ricardo brought warmth and humor to households across the nation. I Love Lucy was groundbreaking in several ways. It featured a real-life married couple on screen, used a multi-camera setup before a live audience, and pioneered the concept of reruns by filming each episode. At its peak, the show drew more than 40 million viewers, uniting families on Monday nights. It also left an enduring mark on television history, setting standards for sitcoms that continue today. Beyond the laughs, the program captured the everyday aspirations and frustrations of post-war family life, making it relatable across generations. In the 1950s, Lucy wasn't just a character. She was part of America's collective living room, bringing joy and laughter week after week. 18. Comic books popularity. The 1950s were a pivotal decade for comic books, which became an essential part of youth culture. Superheroes like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman remained popular, but new genres also flourished, including westerns, romance, horror, and crime stories. Kids flocked to corner stores to buy comics for just 10 cents, often trading them with friends or collecting them in stacks under their beds. Comic books provided escapism and imagination, offering colorful characters and thrilling adventures at a time when television was still growing. However, comics also faced controversy. In 1954, concerns about violence and morality led to the creation of the Comics Code Authority, which imposed guidelines on story content. Despite restrictions, the medium continued to thrive, shaping the creativity of a generation. For many children, comic books were a gateway to reading, sparking a lifelong love of stories and art. They also mirrored the hopes and fears of the era, from tales of alien invasions to dreamy teenage romances. In the 1950s, comics weren't just entertainment on paper. They were part of the rhythm of childhood, carried in backpacks, read under blankets, and shared on playgrounds everywhere. 19. Teen fashion. Influenced by movies. Teenagers in the 1950s looked to Hollywood for fashion inspiration, copying the styles of stars who defined cool and glamour. James Dean's casual look in Rebel Without a Cause made leather jackets, jeans, and white t-shirts an instant symbol of youthful rebellion. Elvis Presley's flashy stage outfits influenced hairstyles and bold accessories. For young women, actresses like Audrey Hepburn and Sandra Dee set trends with tailored skirts, sweaters, and polished but playful looks. Poodle skirts decorated with felt appliques, saddle shoes, and cardigan sweaters became iconic images of high school dances and soda shops. Movie theaters doubled as fashion runways, where teens observed and imitated their idols. Clothing wasn't just about style. It became a way for young people to express identity and independence during a time when teen culture was emerging as a powerful force. Local stores responded quickly, offering affordable versions of Hollywood-inspired outfits. For many, putting on a leather jacket or twirling in a full skirt meant stepping into a role, borrowing a bit of movie magic. In the 1950s, fashion reflected not only what was worn on screen, but also the growing voice of American youth. 20. Sock hops and jukebox culture. Few activities capture the carefree spirit of 1950s teenagers better than the sock hop. These informal dances, often held in school gyms, got their name from students, removing their shoes to protect the polished floors. With jukeboxes providing the soundtrack, teens danced to the latest rock and roll hits, from Chuck Berry to Buddy Holly. The jukebox itself was a marvel of design, glowing with colorful lights and filled with dozens of records at the touch of a button. For a small coin, music filled the room, and couples took to the floor to twist, jitterbug, or slow dance. Sock hops were affordable, wholesome events that gave teens a sense of community and freedom. They also highlighted the influence of music on daily life, where songs weren't just entertainment but central to identity and social interaction. Adults sometimes looked on with concern, unsure about the new rhythms sweeping youth culture. But for teenagers, the dances represented joy, connection, and belonging. The jukebox, humming in diners and dance halls, became a symbol of the decade, always ready to play the soundtrack of an unforgettable evening. At the same time, technology was reshaping America. 21. Television ownership skyrockets. By the early 1950s, television transformed from a luxury item to a household essential. In 1948, only about 1 million American homes had a TV. By 1955, that number had exploded to more than 30 million. Families eagerly gathered in their living rooms, arranging chairs around a glowing screen that became the new hearth of the home. Popular shows like The Ed Sullivan Show, Leave It to Beaver, and I Love Lucy gave families shared stories and catchphrases that echoed across neighborhoods. For children, Saturday morning cartoons provided joy, while news broadcasts brought world events directly into the living room. The rapid spread of television also reshaped advertising. Commercials for soap, toothpaste, and soft drinks turned jingles into cultural touchstones, making TV not just entertainment but also a marketplace. Politicians recognized its power too. Dwight Eisenhower's presidential campaign used televised ads to reach voters. Television wasn't simply an invention, it was a revolution in communication. By mid-decade, owning a TV became a sign of middle-class stability, a symbol of progress, and a portal to a rapidly changing world. For better or worse, television defined the rhythms of daily life in 1950s America. 22. Transistor radio invention. The invention of the transistor radio in 1954 gave music, news, and entertainment a new level of portability. Prior to this, radios were bulky fixtures in the home, often housed in wooden cabinets that stood like furniture. The transistor, a small, powerful electronic component, changed everything. Suddenly, radios could be compact, lightweight, and battery-powered. Teenagers quickly adopted them, slipping pocket-sized radios into purses or backpacks, and carrying the soundtrack of rock and roll wherever they went. For the first time, young people didn't have to share the family living room radio. They could tune into their own stations, choosing music that reflected their tastes and independence. The portability of the transistor radio also made it a companion for outdoor activities. Beach trips, picnics, and ball games. Advertisers marketed them as modern, stylish, and affordable, appealing to a generation eager to embrace new gadgets. More than just a technical achievement, the transistor radio symbolized freedom, freedom of choice, freedom of mobility, and freedom of self-expression. It democratized access to culture, creating a direct line between DJs, musicians, and listeners on the move. The tiny transistor radio carried the sound of a cultural revolution. 23. Polio vaccine breakthrough. One of the most significant medical achievements of the 1950s was the development of the polio vaccine by Dr. Jonas Salk. Polio, a crippling and sometimes fatal disease, had haunted families for decades, especially frightening parents during summer outbreaks. Children could contract the virus and be left paralyzed, confined to wheelchairs, or reliant on cumbersome iron lungs that helped them breathe. Communities lived in fear, cancelling swimming lessons and public gatherings during peak months. In 1955, Salk announced that his vaccine was both safe and effective. The news was met with relief and celebration. Mass vaccination campaigns quickly followed, often held in schools or community centers, where children lined up for their shots. For many families, it was the first time medical science felt like a miracle within reach. Polio cases declined dramatically, and the sense of security restored was immeasurable. The breakthrough highlighted the growing power of science to conquer disease and gave Americans hope that modern medicine could solve problems once thought insurmountable. The polio vaccine wasn't just a triumph of public health, it was a defining moment of trust in science and collective action. 24. Kitchen appliances revolutionize homes. The 1950s kitchen became a showcase of modern convenience. Blenders, mixers, toasters, and, most impressively, dishwashers transformed domestic life. After years of wartime rationing and shortages, American families were eager to embrace labor-saving devices that promised efficiency and comfort. Manufacturers advertised brightly colored appliances in pinks, turquoises, and yellows, matching the cheerful tones of suburban homes. Housewives were often portrayed in ads, smiling as gleaming machines lightened their workload, reflecting the era's optimism about technology. The blender, once a novelty, became a staple for milkshakes and smoothies, while stand mixers simplified baking. Dishwashers, though still a luxury for many, symbolized the future, an end to hours spent scrubbing at the sink. These appliances also represented cultural shifts. More families lived in suburban homes with modern kitchens designed to accommodate gadgets. Electricity was reliable, and consumer credit made purchases easier. For women, especially, the promise of more free time suggested new opportunities beyond housework, even if social norms still tied them to domestic roles. In the 1950s, the hum of a new appliance wasn't just background noise, it was the sound of progress and modernity arriving in everyday life. 25. Commercial jet flights begin. The mid-1950s saw the beginning of commercial jet travel, forever changing the way Americans moved across the country and around the globe. Before jets, long-distance travel meant propeller-driven planes, trains, or cars, journeys that could take hours or even days. In 1958, Pan American Airways launched the first U.S. commercial jet service with the Boeing 707, capable of flying faster and higher than earlier aircraft. Suddenly, coast-to-coast trips were cut nearly in half, making air travel more practical and appealing to middle-class families. Airports became modern gateways, filled with excitement as passengers boarded sleek planes that symbolized speed and sophistication. Jet travel wasn't just about convenience. It carried a sense of glamour. Stewardesses in crisp uniforms served meals, and passengers dressed in their finest clothes to fly. The jet age also brought the world closer together, encouraging international tourism and cultural exchange. While only a fraction of Americans flew regularly in the 1950s, the introduction of jetliners pointed toward a future where air travel would be routine. Commercial jet flights represented not just technological progress, but also the shrinking of distances in an increasingly connected world. 26. Credit cards appear. Diners Club. The birth of the modern credit card in 1950 introduced a new way of paying for goods and services. The Diners Club card, first issued to a small group of businessmen in New York, allowed holders to pay at restaurants without carrying cash. At first, the idea seemed novel, even odd, but it quickly caught on as more establishments signed up. By the mid-1950s, thousands of restaurants, hotels, and shops accepted the Diners Club card, and competitors soon emerged. For many Americans, credit cards symbolized convenience, flexibility, and modern living. They also reflected the growing consumer culture of the decade, where spending on new appliances, cars, and vacations was encouraged. Though early cards were primarily used by wealthier professionals, the seeds were planted for a future in which nearly every family would carry plastic in their wallets. With credit, purchasing power expanded, but so did the concept of debt. The credit card marked a turning point in American financial habits, shifting the nation toward a buy now, pay later mentality. It was a small piece of cardboard that carried big implications for the future of consumer life. 27. Early computers in business. While most Americans in the 1950s never saw a computer, the decade marked the beginning of their use in business and government. Early computers like the UNIVAC, Universal Automatic Computer, were massive machines, filling entire rooms with humming cabinets of wires, tubes, and tape reels. Yet their processing power was astonishing for the time, capable of handling calculations and data management far faster than humans. In 1952, UNIVAC gained fame for correctly predicting Dwight Eisenhower's presidential victory based on early returns. A stunning demonstration of computational ability. Businesses began experimenting with computers to manage payroll, inventories, and financial records, seeing them as tools for efficiency and accuracy. Government agencies, too, adopted them for census data and defense research. Though still prohibitively expensive and complex, these early computers laid the groundwork for the digital revolution. For most families, the idea of a machine that thought was both fascinating and intimidating, sparking imaginations about a future shaped by automation. In the 1950s, computers were not yet personal, but their arrival signaled the dawn of a new era in information and technology. 28. Push-button telephones. For decades, the rotary dial telephone defined communication in American homes. But in the late 1950s, the introduction of the push-button telephone promised a faster, sleeker way to connect. Instead of slowly rotating a dial and waiting for it to return, callers could press numbered buttons that instantly registered. Bell Telephone first showcased the technology in 1959, presenting it as a symbol of modern living. While widespread adoption would take longer, the concept captured imaginations. The push-button phone matched the streamlined aesthetics of the age. Chrome, plastic, and clean lines. It also pointed toward a future of touch-tone dialing, voicemail, and automated services. For families accustomed to the rotary's familiar clicks, the push-button model felt futuristic, almost luxurious. It represented more than convenience. It was a statement about progress. Advertisements often paired the new phones with images of stylish suburban homes, promising customers they could stay connected in a modern way. The push-button telephone was a small but meaningful innovation, one that reflected the optimism of a decade when technology seemed to move forward with every passing year. 29. Car culture innovations, tail fins and chrome. Cars in the 1950s were more than transportation. They were rolling works of art and status symbols. Automakers competed to design the flashiest, most futuristic vehicles, and two defining features emerged: tail fins and chrome. Inspired by jet aircraft and rockets, tail fins soared skyward at the back of cars, giving them a sleek, space-age look. Chrome trim sparkled across grilles, bumpers, and dashboards, catching the light and turning cars into dazzling showpieces. Models like the Cadillac Eldorado and Chevrolet Bel Air embodied the era's exuberance. Driving wasn't just about getting from one place to another, it was about being seen. Suburban families relied on their cars for commuting, shopping, and leisure, while teenagers cruised main streets or gathered at drive-ins. The automobile represented freedom and individuality, and styling mattered as much as performance. With gasoline cheap and highways expanding, the car became central to the American lifestyle. Tail fins and chrome reflected more than design trends. They captured the bold, optimistic spirit of the decade, when even a family sedan could feel like a rocket ship headed toward tomorrow. 30. Space race. Beginnings. The late 1950s introduced a new frontier that would dominate the next decade: space exploration. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik first, the first artificial satellite to orbit Earth. Its beeping signal shocked Americans, sparking both awe and fear. Suddenly, the Cold War extended beyond Earth's atmosphere, and the space race was born. The U.S. responded by accelerating its own space program, establishing NASA in 1958. Schools emphasized science and math, and popular culture filled with images of rockets, astronauts, and futuristic cities. Families gazed up at the night sky with a new sense of possibility, imagining that one day humans might live beyond Earth. The space race was more than a contest of technology. It was a contest of ideology, with both superpowers eager to prove the superiority of their system. For children of the 1950s, toy rockets and space helmets became symbols of adventure. For adults, the launch of satellites raised serious questions about defense and national security. The decade closed with a sense of anticipation. The sky was no longer the limit, and humanity had set its sights on the stars. Meanwhile, American families were also shaped by education and culture. 31. Baby boom. Generation growth. The end of World War II marked the beginning of one of the largest population surges in American history: the baby boom. Between 1946 and 1964, over 76 million babies were born in the United States, creating a demographic wave that reshaped nearly every aspect of society. In the 1950s alone, maternity wards were often filled beyond capacity, and towns scrambled to keep up with the growing demand for schools, playgrounds, and family services. This surge of children gave rise to industries focused on youth, from toys and clothes to books and entertainment. While advertisers quickly realized the power of marketing to families, the baby boom also influenced housing trends. Suburban neighborhoods like Levittown expanded rapidly to provide affordable homes for young families eager to settle down. The cultural emphasis on family life meant that children were often at the center of daily routines, with parents prioritizing security and stability. Looking back, the baby boom wasn't just a surge in numbers. It was a defining feature of the post-war optimism that shaped American identity, with a new generation growing up in an era of relative prosperity and promise. 32. Classroom life in the 1950s. Classroom life in the 1950s reflected both tradition and transition. Desks were often arranged in straight rows, facing a blackboard where teachers used chalk to deliver lessons. Children recited the Pledge of Allegiance each morning, and discipline was strict, with expectations for neat handwriting, punctuality, and respect. Textbooks emphasized reading, arithmetic, and civics, with an increasing focus on science after the Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957. Class sizes grew dramatically due to the baby boom, sometimes leaving teachers with 40 or more students in a single room. Despite the challenges, schools were central to community life, serving as gathering places for plays, sporting events, and parent-teacher meetings. Many classrooms lacked modern technology, but new audio-visual tools, like film projectors and record players, began appearing to supplement lessons. For students, recess and lunchtime offered chances to socialize, while extracurricular clubs fostered teamwork and creativity. The school experience was both rigorous and communal, shaping a generation that would later become leaders, innovators, and activists. In many ways, the classrooms of the 1950s laid the foundation for America's cultural and technological advances in the decades that followed. 33. Popular children's toys, hula hoops, and Mr. Potato Head. The 1950s brought a wave of playful inventions that captured children's imaginations. Among them, the hula hoop became a national sensation in 1958. Simple yet endlessly entertaining, it inspired playground competitions and even fitness fads among adults. That same decade saw the debut of Mr. Potato Head in 1952, the first toy advertised directly on television. Originally sold with just plastic parts to stick into a real potato, it quickly became a household favorite once a plastic body was added. Toys reflected the optimism and creativity of the post-war years, with companies experimenting with plastics and mass production. Barbie, introduced in 1959, also made her debut, forever changing the toy industry with a focus on fashion and storytelling. Board games like Candyland and Chutes and Ladders encouraged family play, while toy soldiers and model trains entertained countless children. These toys weren't just diversions, they reflected cultural values of the era, from health and playfulness to consumer innovation. They also highlighted the growing influence of advertising, as television transformed toys into national crazes almost overnight. In 1950s America, playtime itself became a reflection of modern life. 34. Families gathered around TV nightly. Television was more than just a screen. It became the modern family campfire. By the mid-1950s, millions of households had a TV set, and families would gather each evening to watch favorite programs together. Popular shows like I Love Lucy, The Honeymooners, and The Ed Sullivan Show brought laughter, music, and variety into living rooms across the country. Dinner was often timed so everyone could sit down in front of the glowing set, and children eagerly waited for cartoons or westerns to come on. The shared experience of television created a sense of national unity. Millions could watch the same show on the same night and talk about it the next day at school or work. It also changed the architecture of homes, with living rooms redesigned to accommodate the TV as a central feature. For many, the television was a window into worlds they might never otherwise see, from distant cities to international events. It fostered family togetherness, while also shaping tastes, humor, and even language. In the 1950s, the nightly ritual of gathering around the TV became a defining symbol of American domestic life. 35. Women balancing home and work. In the 1950s, cultural expectations often painted women as homemakers, yet many also contributed to the workforce. Magazines and advertisements frequently depicted the ideal housewife in pearls and aprons, happily managing the home with the help of modern appliances. But the reality was more complex. Many women worked part-time or full-time jobs to support their families, especially as consumer costs rose with the post-war boom. Occupations ranged from teaching and nursing to secretarial roles, retail, and factory work. Some women faced a balancing act, caring for children, maintaining households, and holding jobs outside the home. At the same time, the decade's emphasis on suburban life often reinforced the notion that women's primary role was domestic. Despite these cultural pressures, the seeds of change were evident. More women pursued college degrees, and organizations began to question rigid gender roles. The experience of balancing work and home life in the 1950s would lay the groundwork for the feminist movements of the 1960 seconds and beyond. For many families, the daily contributions of women, both inside and outside the home, were essential to the prosperity of the decade. 36. Rise of teen culture. The 1950s witnessed the birth of the modern teenager as a distinct cultural force. With more disposable income and leisure time than previous generations, teens shaped fashion, music, and entertainment. Rock and roll, led by artists like Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry, became the soundtrack of rebellion and youthful energy. Drive-ins, soda fountains, and school dances gave teens their own social spaces, apart from parents and younger siblings. Hollywood noticed too, producing films like Rebel Without a Cause that captured the struggles and identity of adolescence. Fashion reflected the shift, with poodle skirts, leather jackets, and cuffed jeans defining the look of youth. Advertisers quickly recognized teenagers as a powerful market, promoting everything from soft drinks to records directly to them. For the first time, teenagers were seen not simply as older children, but as a cultural group with their own tastes and values. This rise of teen culture challenged traditional norms and created a generational divide, but it also added vibrancy to American life. The 1950s teen was not just growing up, they were reshaping the culture around them. 37. Lunchbox culture for kids. In the 1950s, the school lunchbox became more than just a container. It became a symbol of childhood identity. With the baby boom flooding classrooms, lunchboxes were mass-produced in bright colors and decorated with popular characters from television, comics, and movies. Children proudly carried metal boxes featuring Howdy Doody, Superman, or Mickey Mouse, often matching them with matching thermoses. The lunchbox craze reflected the intersection of consumer culture and childhood, as marketing turned even mealtimes into opportunities for self-expression. Beyond design, lunchboxes also mirrored changing food habits. Packaged snacks, sandwiches, and thermos-filled soups reflected the growing convenience of processed foods. For many kids, the lunchbox wasn't just functional. It was a personal statement, a way to fit in or stand out in the crowded cafeteria. Collectible and durable, some lunchboxes from the 1950s are now considered prized antiques, representing a golden era of childhood nostalgia. In its own small way, the lunchbox captured the essence of the decade. Practical, colorful, and infused with the excitement of pop culture. 38. New schools, built for growing suburbs. The explosion of the baby boom and suburban expansion created an urgent need for new schools. Across the 1950s, towns rapidly built classrooms, cafeterias, and gyms to accommodate swelling student populations. Rows of freshly painted elementary schools appeared in newly developed neighborhoods, often designed with modern architecture and open playgrounds. Bond measures and local taxes funded the projects, reflecting a national commitment to education. Teachers were recruited in large numbers, and entire communities rallied around the idea of building strong school systems for their children. School buses became more common, transporting students from sprawling suburban areas. The emphasis on education was also shaped by Cold War concerns, with greater attention given to math and science after the launch of Sputnik. Beyond academics, these new schools became social hubs, hosting concerts, sports, and parent gatherings. The sight of children pouring into brand new classrooms each morning symbolized the optimism of the time. For many families, the opening of a neighborhood school was as significant as the purchase of a new home. It represented stability, progress, and the promise of a brighter future. 39. Expansion of libraries and bookmobiles. Reading remained a cherished part of 1950s American life, and libraries flourished during this decade. Communities expanded existing libraries or built new ones to keep pace with growing populations. Bookmobiles, trucks fitted with shelves of books, traveled to suburban and rural areas, bringing literature directly to families who might not otherwise have access. For many children, the arrival of the bookmobile was an exciting event, offering fresh stories and adventures on wheels. Librarians played an important role in encouraging literacy, organizing story hours, and reading programs that inspired young minds. Collections expanded to include not just classics but also magazines, educational resources, and popular fiction. Libraries provided a quiet refuge for study and imagination, reflecting the era's emphasis on self-improvement and education. In a time before the internet, they were vital centers of knowledge, connecting people to ideas and information far beyond their hometowns. The expansion of libraries and bookmobiles in the 1950s highlighted America's commitment to learning and community growth, ensuring that the written word remained central even in an age increasingly dominated by television. 40. Career expectations of young men. For young men in the 1950s, career expectations were often clear and structured. Many were encouraged to pursue stable jobs in business, trades, or industry, reflecting the era's emphasis on security and responsibility. The GI Bill opened doors for veterans to attend college, creating pathways into professions like engineering, teaching, and management. Others joined unions and worked in manufacturing, where wages provided comfortable middle-class lives. The image of the male breadwinner was reinforced by culture, where films, television, and advertisements often depicted men in suits, heading to the office or in uniforms symbolizing skilled labor. While some young men dreamed of adventure or artistic careers, societal pressures emphasized practicality and family stability. High school guidance counselors often steered boys towards steady occupations, and military service remained a common step in adulthood. Though opportunities varied by class and region, the overarching theme was responsibility. Young men were expected to provide, protect, and contribute to the nation's post-war prosperity. These expectations created stability, but they also limited freedom, setting the stage for later generational shifts in the 1960s and beyond. Another surprising detail was found in music and art. The 1950s in America were a time of profound change, where optimism met experimentation and tradition collided with rebellion. In this decade, culture pulsed with a new rhythm, one that resonated through radios, record players, art galleries, magazine stands, and theaters. The post-war baby boom had filled the nation with youth, and youth demanded something different: sounds, stories, and images that reflected their growing independence and restless energy. Out of this hunger came the birth of new artistic movements, the redefinition of old genres, and the embrace of entertainment as a unifying cultural force. 41. Birth of rock and roll. The arrival of rock and roll in the mid-1950s marked a cultural earthquake. More than just a genre, it became a declaration of youth identity. Chuck Berry electrified the nation with his guitar riffs, blending rhythm and blues with storytelling lyrics that spoke to teenagers' lives. Little Richard added flamboyant energy with pounding piano rhythms and wild stage presence. Then came Elvis Presley, the King, whose 1954 debut single, That's All Right, symbolized the crossover of African-American musical traditions into the mainstream. His swiveling hips, sneer, and magnetic voice scandalized some parents and clergy, yet they thrilled millions of teenagers who saw in him the embodiment of freedom. Rock and roll did not just entertain, it divided and redefined. Parents worried it encouraged rebellion, while young listeners felt it expressed truths no classroom lecture could capture. The music spoke of cars, love, heartbreak, and dreams of escape, and it became the soundtrack of an emerging youth culture that would soon reshape America entirely. 42. Jazz clubs thriving. Even as rock surged, jazz held a powerful place in 1950s nightlife. In smoky clubs of New York, Chicago, and New Orleans, the sound of improvisation thrived. Miles Davis released Kind of Blue at the end of the decade, pushing the boundaries of modal jazz. John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk, and Dave Brubeck experimented with rhythm, harmony, and form, making jazz not just popular music, but high art. Jazz clubs offered something distinct from the teen-driven frenzy of rock: intimacy, sophistication, and spontaneity. Couples on dates sat shoulder to shoulder, absorbing solos that seemed to capture the restless mood of the post-war era. Jazz mirrored the complexities of a changing world: improvisational, unpredictable, yet deeply structured. For intellectuals, artists, and musicians, jazz remained the pulse of modern creativity. 43. Country music's popularity. While rock and jazz captured city audiences, country music thrived in America's heartland. The Grand Ole Opry broadcasted weekly, uniting rural families around the radio. Artists like Hank Williams, Patsy Cline, and Johnny Cash gave voice to everyday struggles: heartbreak, faith, family, and hard work. Their simple yet powerful lyrics resonated with people living outside booming urban centers. Country's popularity also reflected America's shifting demographics. As people moved from farms to suburbs, they carried with them the twang of fiddles and steel guitars. Country music's authenticity reassured listeners that even in a rapidly modernizing world, tradition still mattered. The genre would soon merge with rock influences, paving the way for rockabilly and crossover artists. 44. Beat generation writers. If music expressed youth's voice, literature captured its restless spirit. The Beat generation emerged as a literary counterculture. Writers like Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and William S. Burroughs rejected conventional life, suburban conformity, and materialism. Their works, Kerouac's On the Road or Ginsberg's Howl, embraced spontaneity, spirituality, and rebellion. The Beats often gathered in coffee houses and jazz clubs, finding inspiration in improvisation and nonconformity. They celebrated freedom of expression, sexual liberation, and experimentation with drugs and Eastern philosophy. Mainstream America often dismissed them as radicals or degenerates, yet their writing foreshadowed the countercultural revolutions of the 1960 seconds. 45. Norman Rockwell magazine covers. While the Beats critiqued American life, Norman Rockwell celebrated it, though not without subtle commentary. His covers for the Saturday Evening Post became iconic depictions of 1950s family values. Children at play, parents guiding their households, communities gathering for holidays. His art portrayed America not as it was, but as many wanted it to be: wholesome, secure, and harmonious. Rockwell's illustrations reassured Americans during times of change, offering comfort in the familiar. Yet beneath the surface, he also touched on themes of justice, tolerance, and national identity. His later works, especially those of the 1960s, would lean more explicitly into civil rights. But in the 1950s, his magazine covers became a cultural anchor, decorating living rooms across the country. 46. Abstract expressionism in art. In contrast to Rockwell's accessible realism, the avant-garde world celebrated abstraction. Abstract expressionism, led by artists like Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, and Mark Rothko, challenged audiences to find meaning in chaos, gesture, and color. Pollock's drip paintings, seemingly random splatters, embodied both freedom and intensity, reflecting America's new role as a cultural as well as political superpower. For some, abstract art symbolized the triumph of individuality in a Cold War world dominated by conformity. For others, it was confusing or elitist. Yet its rise in galleries and museums cemented America's influence on the global art stage, shifting the center of innovation from Paris to New York. 47. Broadway musicals, booming. Meanwhile, Broadway sparkled with song and spectacle. The 1950s were a golden age for musicals. The King and I, 1951, My Fair Lady, 1956, West Side Story, 1957, and The Sound of Music, 1959, transformed theatre into cultural landmarks. These productions blended music, dance, and storytelling in ways that reached both elite and mainstream audiences. Broadway musicals often reflected social themes beneath their entertainment value. West Side Story explored immigration, prejudice, and urban tension, while My Fair Lady questioned class and transformation. Families traveled to New York just to see these productions, and their songs quickly entered the cultural lexicon, played on record players at home. 48. Rise of doo-wop groups. At the street level, music found another outlet: doo-wop. In urban neighborhoods, particularly among African American and Italian American youth, harmony groups gathered under street lamps, singing a cappella. Groups like the Platters, the Drifters, and Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers brought polished versions of these harmonies to national stages. Doo-wop was romantic, melodic, and accessible. Its catchy refrains and vocal layering made it a favorite at school dances and jukeboxes. For many, it bridged the gap between R&B and mainstream pop, offering an introduction to black musical traditions for white audiences. 49. Billboard music charts start. The growing variety of music demanded measurement, and in 1958, Billboard launched the Hot 100 chart. This ranking of singles by sales and radio play gave artists tangible recognition and provided fans with a snapshot of what defined American taste. Suddenly, popularity could be quantified, and careers rose or fell based on chart position. The Billboard charts also highlighted the growing commercial power of youth culture. Record companies now targeted teenagers directly, knowing their purchases determined hits. Music was no longer just art. It was big business. 50. Record players in homes. All of this music, rock, jazz, country, Broadway, doo-wop, found its way into homes through record players. By the 1950s, the turntable was a staple of the American living room. Families gathered to listen to albums. Teenagers danced in basements. and friends shared stacks of 45 seconds at parties. The record player became more than technology. It was a symbol of independence. Teens could buy a single and play it endlessly, escaping into the world of their chosen idols. Parents might still tune the radio to Frank Sinatra or Perry Como, but teenagers spun Elvis, Buddy Holly, or the Everly Brothers, marking a generational divide. 51. Meanwhile, across America's cities and towns, as the decade progressed, the rise of rock and roll, the endurance of jazz, the popularity of country, the rebellion of beat writers, the comforting brush of Norman Rockwell, the chaos of abstract expressionism, the shimmer of Broadway, and the harmonies of doo-wop all combined to define the cultural heartbeat of the 1950s. These artistic movements gave Americans a soundtrack and a canvas upon which to project both their dreams and anxieties. Yet culture was not confined to music halls, galleries, or magazine covers. Meanwhile, across America's cities and towns, the rhythms of daily life were also transforming, shaped by suburban growth, technology, and the evolving patterns of family and community. The 1950s in America were more than a decade of booming suburbs, television sets, and rock and roll. They were years when the very idea of movement, how Americans traveled, commuted, and explored their nation, was transformed. Asphalt spread like veins across the country. Neon lights blinked from roadside motels. Buses hummed between cities. And cars became not just machines but symbols of freedom. From highways to main streets, the landscape of mobility shaped daily life, leisure, and commerce. 52. The Interstate Highway Act of 1956. The most sweeping change came with the passage of the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, better known as the Interstate Highway Act, signed into law by President Dwight D. Eisenhower. It authorized the construction of over 40,000 miles of highways, the largest public works project in American history at that time. Eisenhower had seen the efficiency of Germany's Autobahn during World War II and envisioned a network of wide, multi-lane roads crisscrossing America for both defense and commerce. The interstate highways changed everything. Small towns, once isolated, became accessible. Goods moved faster, fueling the consumer boom. Suburbs flourished, as workers could now live farther from the cities where they worked. The road itself became part of the American identity. Long, smooth, seemingly endless stretches of possibility. For families, these new highways represented adventure. For truckers, they were lifelines. For businesses, they were opportunities waiting at every exit ramp. 53. Growth of motels and roadside signs. With new highways came new needs. Motels sprouted like wildflowers along interstates, offering families affordable places to rest after a day on the road. Unlike traditional downtown hotels, motels provided easy access. Pull up, park, unpack, and sleep just a few steps from your car. Chains like Holiday Inn pioneered consistent service across multiple locations, giving travelers reliability no matter where the road took them. Roadside signs became part of the journey itself. Giant billboards announced diners, amusement parks, or gas stations miles in advance. Neon lights beckoned tired travelers at dusk. Quirky attractions, see the world's largest ball of twine, capitalized on roadside curiosity. These signs were not just advertisements, they were promises of comfort, entertainment, or wonder on the open road. 54. Greyhound bus travel. For those without cars, or those preferring not to drive, Greyhound buses offered another way to connect America. In the 1950s, bus stations buzzed with travelers. Students heading to college, workers commuting long distances, families visiting relatives in another state. Greyhound's slogan, "Go Greyhound and leave the driving to us," captured the appeal of relaxed, inexpensive travel. Inside, passengers sank into upholstered seats, often with little more than a suitcase and a paperback. For many working-class Americans, Greyhound was their ticket to opportunity, enabling migration to cities for jobs or military service. Unlike the personal freedom of the car, the bus represented communal travel, a reminder that mobility could be both individual and collective. 55. Rise of family road trips. Still, nothing matched the cultural impact of the family road trip. With booming car ownership, cheap gasoline, and expanding highways, middle-class families piled into station wagons every summer. Roof racks stacked with luggage, coolers filled with sandwiches and soda, and kids sprawled across the back seat became iconic images of post-war leisure. Destinations ranged from Yellowstone to Disney's newly opened Disneyland in California. Families explored natural wonders, historical sites, and quirky roadside attractions. Postcards were mailed home from motels. Souvenir shops sold snow globes, pennants, and miniature license plates with children's names. For children, these trips built lasting memories. For parents, they represented the promise that hard work in booming post-war industries had earned them not just security, but the freedom to roam. 56. Subways and urban commuting. While highways transformed the suburbs, urban commuting told another story. Cities like New York, Boston, and Chicago relied on subways and elevated trains to carry millions of workers daily. In the 1950s, subway cars clattered with the sound of morning newspapers unfolding and briefcases snapping shut. Urban commuting also highlighted America's dual identity, a car-driven suburban dream alongside mass transit systems that sustained dense urban life. While suburban families gloried in independence behind the wheel, city commuters embraced routine and efficiency beneath the streets. For both, mobility was central to the rhythm of life. 57. Route 66's popularity. Among all roads, none carried the mythic allure of Route 66. Running from Chicago to Santa Monica, it earned nicknames like the Mother Road and Main Street of America. In the 1950s, Route 66 symbolized freedom and adventure. Motels, diners, and gas stations clustered along its path, serving a steady stream of tourists and long-haul truckers. Songs, stories, and postcards immortalized the road. Families took detours to see the Painted Desert, the Grand Canyon, or roadside oddities. Teenagers fantasized about hitting Route 66 inches a hot rod, escaping small-town life. It wasn't just a road. It was a cultural artery carrying both dreams and commerce. 58. Public parks and recreation. As mobility expanded, so too did access to public parks and recreation areas. Families stopped at roadside picnic tables, maintained by state highway departments. National parks welcomed surging numbers of visitors, with the car providing easy access to once remote landscapes. Local parks thrived as well, offering baseball diamonds, public pools, and shaded benches where neighbors gathered. The growth of recreation reflected America's post-war optimism. Leisure time was no longer a luxury. It was an expectation. Parks became democratic spaces, open to all classes, where families could spend a Sunday afternoon or a vacation week immersed in nature. 59. City diners, open late. Back in urban centers, diners became landmarks of mobility. Open late into the night, they catered to travelers, shift workers, and teenagers seeking a place to gather. Stainless steel counters, chrome stools, and jukeboxes defined their style. Menus promised hot coffee, pancakes, hamburgers, and pie at any hour. The diner was more than a restaurant. It was a community hub. Truckers stopped for meals before hitting the road again. Young couples lingered over milkshakes. Police officers on late shifts grabbed a quick bite. In their accessibility and affordability, diners embodied the democratic spirit of 1950s America. 60. Small-town main streets thriving. While highways pulled some traffic away, small-town main streets still thrived in the 1950s. Department stores, movie theaters, barber shops, and soda fountains lined downtown strips. Saturday nights brought crowds, with families strolling sidewalks and teens cruising in cars. Storefront windows displayed televisions, appliances, and fashions that reflected the decade's consumer boom. Main streets symbolized local identity. They were places where people knew their neighbors, where businesses were family-owned, and where the community gathered for parades and festivals. Though the seeds of decline were planted with the rise of suburban shopping malls, in the 1950s, main streets still pulsed with vitality. 61. American cars exported abroad. As America celebrated its car culture, its influence spread worldwide. American cars were exported abroad, admired for their size, power, and style. Sleek designs with chrome details and dramatic tail fins turned heads in Europe and Asia, where smaller, more practical cars dominated. These exports were not just vehicles, they were cultural ambassadors. Owning an American car abroad symbolized modernity and prosperity. Meanwhile, Detroit became the global capital of automotive innovation, with brands like Ford, Chevrolet, and Cadillac shaping international perceptions of American life. Let's move from roads to sports and leisure. By the end of the 1950s, America's highways and byways told a story of transformation. The Interstate Highway Act had knit the country together with asphalt. Motels and neon signs redefined the roadside landscape. Families embraced road trips, Greyhound buses carried the working class, and subways sustained urban life. Route 66 captured the nation's imagination. Parks celebrated recreation. Diners welcomed all hours. Main streets thrived, and American cars carried their influence across oceans. Mobility was no longer a privilege. It was the backbone of mid-century America. The road defined identity, commerce, and culture. Yet the story of the 1950s was not confined to the pavement or the city grid. Let's move from roads to sports and leisure, where stadiums, playgrounds, and living rooms echoed with another kind of energy. The sound of games, athletic heroes, and the joy of recreation, play, sport, and leisure in 1950s America. In the 1950s, America's fields, arenas, and backyards echoed with the sounds of play. Sports heroes inspired children, neighborhood alleys hummed with the crash of bowling pins, and leisure activities filled weekends with gentle joys. From stadium cheers to quiet fishing trips, this decade revealed much about how a prosperous, optimistic society sought fun, health, and togetherness. 62. Jackie Robinson in baseball. Baseball remained America's national pastime in the 1950s, and Jackie Robinson stood at its heart. Having broken Major League Baseball's color barrier in 1947, Robinson spent the 1950s proving not only that he belonged, but that he excelled. As a member of the Brooklyn Dodgers, he played with electrifying speed, sharp instincts, and a fearless spirit. By the early 1950s, he had won both fans and respect across the country, though he still endured racial hostility on and off the field. For many Americans, Robinson represented progress. His presence on the diamond suggested that the game, and perhaps the nation itself, could slowly move toward greater inclusion. Children who idolized him often saw more than a ball player. They saw a model of courage. In classrooms, playgrounds, and backyard games, his influence reached beyond the scoreboard. 63. Birth of the NBA. While baseball captured tradition, basketball was quietly inventing its modern future. In 1949, the Basketball Association of America merged with the National Basketball League to create the National Basketball Association, NBA. By the 1950s, the league was still young but growing steadily. Stars like George Mikan of the Minneapolis Lakers dominated the court, demonstrating that basketball could produce legends of its own. The 1954 introduction of the 24-second shot clock transformed the game into the fast-paced contest we know today. Families began attending games in local arenas, while small television broadcasts introduced basketball to living rooms across the country. Though the NBA of the 1950s was not yet the global spectacle it would become, its seeds of excitement, strategy, and athletic drama were firmly planted. 64. Bowling alleys booming. Few places captured mid-century leisure better than the bowling alley. By the mid-1950s, millions of Americans were rolling strikes and spares each week. Bowling had existed for decades, but the combination of suburban growth, inexpensive recreation, and televised tournaments turned it into a national craze. Bowling alleys were social centers. Families went together on weekends, while leagues formed among co-workers, churches, and community groups. The sound of pins clattering echoed alongside the chatter of friends and the clink of soda glasses. Children bowled with lightweight balls, while adults competed in earnest. Bright neon signs marked alleys across small towns and large cities alike. Bowling was fun, affordable, and accessible, making it a perfect pastime for an America seeking cheerful stability. For many, the weekly league night became a highlight of community life. 65. Boxing champions of the era. The 1950s were also a golden period for boxing. Names like Rocky Marciano, Sugar Ray Robinson, and Floyd Patterson drew crowds and headlines. Marciano, in particular, captured attention as the only heavyweight champion to retire undefeated, a symbol of resilience and toughness in an era that admired grit. Matches were broadcast on radio and, increasingly, on television, bringing the drama of the ring directly into American homes. Families gathered around their sets to witness the clash of gloves, the roar of crowds, and the suspense of each round. For young boys shadow boxing in backyards or gyms, these champions embodied dreams of strength and glory. Boxing carried both spectacle and artistry. Its stories lingered in playground debates, sports pages, and the memories of those who stayed up late to hear the final bell. 66. Fishing and camping trips. Not all leisure was loud or competitive. For many Americans, the simple joys of fishing and camping trips provided relaxation and escape. With car ownership expanding, families could load up their vehicles and drive to lakes, rivers, and campgrounds. Affordable tents, coolers, and folding chairs filled trunks as parents and children sought the quiet of nature. Fishing became a bonding ritual. Children learned to bait hooks beside patient fathers and grandfathers. The plunk of a line hitting the water, the soft tug of a fish, and the thrill of reeling it in offered gentle rhythms of peace. Camping, too, offered roasted marshmallows, songs by the fire, and starry skies far from the glow of city lights. These trips connected families not only to each other but also to the land itself. They reminded a booming industrial society of the restorative power of the outdoors. 67. Backyard swimming pools. At home, prosperity revealed itself in backyard swimming pools. Though still a luxury in the early 1950s, pools became more common as suburbs expanded. Developers marketed them as signs of modern living, while families saw them as investments in leisure and status. Children splashed during hot summer afternoons, while parents lounged nearby with lemonade or iced tea. Pool parties became neighborhood events, filled with floating toys, laughter, and radio music drifting from portable speakers. The swimming pool symbolized more than recreation. It embodied the suburban dream of comfort, privacy, and self-contained fun. Even those without pools often visited friends or community swim clubs. The shimmering blue water became a fixture of 1950s imagery, promising health, happiness, and modern convenience. 68. Board games like Monopoly. Leisure often unfolded around kitchen tables, where board games entertained families for hours. Monopoly, though created in the 1930s, reached peak popularity in the 1950s, as post-war prosperity gave its real estate themes new resonance. Players cheerfully bought properties, built hotels, and occasionally quarreled over rules. Other games like Scrabble, Clue, and Sorry joined the shelves, creating a shared culture of play. These games required little more than a board, pieces, and imagination, making them perfect for cozy evenings at home. For children, they built vocabulary, counting skills, and patience. For adults, they provided laughter and competition without leaving the living room. Board games captured the spirit of togetherness. In a decade celebrating family unity, gathering around a game became a ritual as enduring as Sunday dinners. 69. Football rising in popularity. While baseball held tradition and basketball grew steadily, football surged in popularity during the 1950s. College games drew passionate crowds, while the National Football League began building the professional spectacle we know today. The 1958 NFL Championship game, often called the greatest game ever played, introduced millions to the drama of sudden death overtime and sparked new enthusiasm for pro football. Television played a crucial role. Cameras captured the intensity of tackles, the precision of passes, and the excitement of touchdowns. As more households owned TV sets, football expanded from stadiums into living rooms nationwide. For children tossing pigskins in backyards, and for adults cheering in bleachers, football was becoming not just a sport but a growing part of American culture. By the decade's end, it was clear the game's popularity would only rise. 70. Horse racing and the Kentucky Derby. Another sport holding steady tradition was horse racing, especially the Kentucky Derby. Known as the most exciting 2 minutes in sports, the Derby attracted fans from across the nation. Televised coverage allowed millions to witness the pageantry, from the playing of My Old Kentucky Home to the thunder of hooves down the stretch. Owners, trainers, and jockeys became minor celebrities, while winning horses were celebrated in newspapers and on radio. Even those who never attended Churchill Downs followed the Derby as an annual spectacle. For some, it carried the glamour of high society. For others, it was simply a thrilling contest of speed and stamina. Horse racing bridged tradition and modernity, preserving a sport with deep roots while adapting to the new age of mass media. 71. Local fairs and carnivals. Beyond professional sports and formal contests, joy often came from the local fair or carnival. Each summer, towns and counties hosted events filled with Ferris wheels, carousel rides, and cotton candy. Children won goldfish at ring toss games, teenagers rode roller coasters, and families wandered through livestock barns or exhibit halls. These fairs celebrated community identity. Prize-winning pies, blue-ribbon livestock, and marching bands highlighted local talent. Neon lights glowed at dusk, drawing crowds for fireworks or musical performances. For small towns, the fair was a highlight of the year, where neighbors met, romances blossomed, and children carried memories that lasted a lifetime. Carnivals also embodied a democratic spirit of fun. Unlike elite sporting events, they were accessible to nearly everyone, offering joy for the price of a ticket and a hot dog. In science and medicine, important discoveries emerged. Sports, games, and leisure in the 1950s reflected more than recreation. They revealed how Americans balanced tradition and innovation, community and individuality. Jackie Robinson inspired change on the baseball diamond. The NBA's birth hinted at a new sporting frontier. Bowling alleys, boxing matches, and backyard pools captured the social rhythms of the age. Families gathered around board games, while football surged to national prominence. Horse racing preserved its pageantry, and local fairs brought delight to small towns. Through play and competition, America expressed its optimism, its prosperity, and its search for togetherness. Yet beyond the stadiums and carnivals, another story was unfolding. One of laboratories, discoveries, and breakthroughs that promised to change health and knowledge for generations. In science and medicine, important discoveries emerged. Science and medicine in 1950s America. The 1950s were not only about highways, leisure, and booming suburbs. They were also a decade of discovery, of laboratories humming with innovation, of scientists unlocking the mysteries of life, and of doctors finding new ways to fight disease. From vaccines to psychology experiments, from nuclear power plants to children's science kits, this was an age where knowledge expanded rapidly and promised to improve everyday life. 72. The polio vaccine rollout. Few public health efforts in American history inspired as much relief and gratitude as the polio vaccine rollout of the 1950s. Polio, a disease that crippled tens of thousands of children each year, had haunted families for decades. Each summer brought fear of swimming pools, playgrounds, and crowded gatherings, as outbreaks often struck the young. Parents prayed their children would be spared the paralysis that left so many on crutches or confined to iron lungs. In 1955, Dr. Jonas Salk announced that his vaccine was both safe and effective. The response was immediate and emotional. Church bells rang in celebration. Headlines declared the triumph of science. Soon, schools and community centers became vaccination sites, where long lines of children rolled up their sleeves. Parents watched with tears of relief, knowing their children's futures were safer. The vaccine transformed public health. Within a decade, polio cases plummeted. What had once been a terrifying specter became a manageable memory. For many, the rollout symbolized science's ability to protect society and give families peace of mind. 73. Discovery of DNA structure. 1953. At nearly the same moment, across the Atlantic, scientists were making discoveries that redefined life itself. In 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick, building on the X-ray diffraction images captured by Rosalind Franklin, announced the discovery of DNA's double helix structure. The simple yet elegant spiral explained how genetic information was stored and copied, how the blueprint of life passed from one generation to the next. While the immediate implications were understood mostly by specialists, the news quickly filtered into classrooms and newspapers. People marveled at the mysteries of inheritance, why children resembled parents, why diseases ran in families, could be traced to microscopic codes within cells. For many, it felt as if a curtain had been pulled back on nature's deepest secrets. The discovery of DNA's structure marked the beginning of modern genetics. Though few in the 1950s could imagine the biotechnology revolutions to come, the decade's quiet announcement would one day reshape medicine, agriculture, and even ideas about human identity. 74. Nuclear power plants. Another force, both hopeful and unsettling, was nuclear power. After the destructive use of atomic bombs in World War II, scientists and governments turned their attention to peaceful applications of nuclear energy. By the mid-1950s, the first nuclear power plants began operation, promising electricity on a massive scale. Americans watched with fascination as this new form of power was promoted as clean, modern, and nearly limitless. Glossy magazine spreads depicted futuristic cities glowing with nuclear light, while government programs introduced the phrase, "atoms for peace." The promise was clear. Nuclear science could move from fearsome weapons to life-giving energy. Of course, unease lingered. Accidents and radiation risks were already being debated. Yet in the 1950s, optimism outweighed caution. The nuclear power plant symbolized progress, a tool of science that, if wisely managed, could reshape the energy future of the nation. 75. Medical X-rays in common use. In hospitals and clinics, another tool was quietly transforming care: the widespread use of medical X-rays. Though discovered decades earlier, by the 1950s, X-ray machines had become routine instruments in diagnosing broken bones, chest infections, and dental problems. Children with sprained ankles, workers with persistent coughs, and soldiers returning from war all benefited from imaging technology that could peer inside the body without a single incision. For doctors, X-rays offered clarity and precision. For patients, they brought faster treatment and reassurance. At the same time, awareness of radiation risks was limited. Shoe stores even used X-ray machines to show customers how their feet fit into new shoes, a novelty practice that would later be abandoned. But despite these early missteps, X-rays became a cornerstone of modern medicine, representing the power of technology to illuminate what was once hidden. 76. Household vitamins and supplements. Beyond hospitals, science reached directly into American kitchens through the popularity of vitamins and dietary supplements. Advertisements in magazines and on radio promised stronger bodies, sharper minds, and brighter futures through daily tablets. Mothers sprinkled powdered vitamins into children's milk, while adults took multivitamins with breakfast. The boom reflected a culture of health consciousness. With prosperity rising, families sought not just to survive but to thrive. Companies packaged vitamins in colorful bottles, appealing to both children and adults. Cod liver oil, once dreaded, gave way to chewable tablets in fruit flavors. Though not every claim was grounded in rigorous science, the trend revealed a new relationship between medicine and daily life. Health was no longer just about treating illness. It was about prevention, vitality, and living better through chemistry. 77. New antibiotics developed. In the laboratories of the 1950s, researchers continued to unlock the potential of antibiotics. Penicillin, discovered earlier, had already revolutionized medicine during World War II. But now, new antibiotics, such as tetracycline and erythromycin, were developed, offering treatments for a wider range of infections. Hospitals that once struggled with pneumonia, tuberculosis, or strep throat now had powerful tools. Death rates from bacterial diseases plummeted. For families, antibiotics meant that infections that once endangered children could now be swiftly cured. The success of antibiotics reinforced faith in modern science. Each new drug seemed to confirm that medicine could outwit nature's dangers, making life healthier and longer. 78. Agricultural science and fertilizers. The spirit of discovery extended to America's farms. Advances in agricultural science, particularly the use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, promised greater yields and more reliable harvests. Scientists studied soil composition, plant genetics, and irrigation techniques, all with the goal of feeding a growing population. For farmers, the 1950s brought tractors, hybrid seeds, and nitrogen-based fertilizers that transformed rural life. Crops grew taller, harvests grew larger, and food supplies became more stable. Grocery stores reflected the abundance, with fresh produce available year-round. Yet alongside the optimism, some voices warned of over-reliance on chemicals. While such concerns would grow louder in later decades, in the 1950s the emphasis was on progress, science as the farmer's ally, ensuring that America's tables would never be empty. 79. Advances in psychology studies. Science also turned inward, toward the mysteries of the human mind. The 1950s saw significant advances in psychology studies as researchers explored learning, behavior, and personality. F. Skinner's experiments with behaviorism influenced classrooms and parenting strategies, while Carl Rogers and humanistic psychology emphasized personal growth and self-actualization. College students studied Freud, Jung, and new theories of motivation. Mental health care, though still stigmatized, gained attention as hospitals and clinics expanded services. Parents read advice books shaped by psychological insights, hoping to raise children who were not only healthy but emotionally well-adjusted. Television talk shows even invited psychologists to comment on family dynamics, marriage, and child rearing. For many Americans, Psychology offered both curiosity and guidance, making the invisible world of thoughts and feelings more approachable. 80. Early organ transplants. In the operating rooms, surgeons pursued what once seemed impossible: organ transplants. The first successful kidney transplants occurred in the 1950s, demonstrating that one person's organ could sustain another's life. Though survival rates were still limited, the achievement represented a medical frontier. New surgical techniques, advances in anesthesia, and growing knowledge of the immune system made these attempts possible. Families followed such breakthroughs in newspapers, marveling at the courage of both patients and doctors. The idea that a failing body part could be replaced with another's gift carried both hope and awe. Organ transplants embodied the spirit of the decade: bold experiments, risks taken for the sake of saving lives, and faith that science could conquer even death itself. 81. Popularity of science kits for kids. Finally, in living rooms and bedrooms across America, children were discovering science in their own hands. Science kits for kids, complete with test tubes, powders, magnets, and instruction booklets, became popular gifts. They allowed curious youngsters to mix chemicals, build circuits, and watch reactions fizz and spark. These kits reflected the era's emphasis on education and curiosity. Parents saw them as tools to prepare children for a future where science and technology would be essential. Advertisements promised fun, mixed with learning, cultivating the next generation of scientists, doctors, and engineers. For many who grew up in the 1950s, the memory of peering through a toy microscope or launching a homemade rocket marked the beginning of lifelong careers in science. The kits symbolized a culture that believed strongly in discovery and in passing that spirit to its children. Meanwhile, light political events shaped everyday life, from the triumph of the polio vaccine to the wonder of DNA's double helix, from the hum of nuclear power plants to the laughter of children with science kits. The 1950s were an era when discovery seemed to touch every corner of life. Medicine fought disease more effectively than ever before. Agriculture promised abundance. Psychology and surgery pushed boundaries. Science, once the domain of specialists, now entered kitchens, classrooms, and even toy chests. It was a decade of confidence, sometimes cautious, often exuberant, that knowledge could build a brighter tomorrow. Yet while laboratories and clinics made headlines, another story was unfolding in city halls, campaigns, and state fairs. Meanwhile, light political events shaped everyday life. Light political events of the 1950s. The decade of the 1950s in the United States is often remembered for sock hops, booming suburbs, and the rise of television. Yet politics, too, left a quiet but constant imprint on daily life. While not always dramatic, civic developments shaped the structure of communities, the rights of citizens, and America's place in the world. From presidential elections to civil defense drills, from new states preparing to join the Union to the spread of international organizations, political events intertwined with ordinary routines. 82. Presidential elections. Dwight D. Eisenhower. No figure embodied 1950s politics more than Dwight D. Eisenhower, elected president in 1952 and again in 1956. A hero of World War II, Eisenhower carried the image of steady leadership. For many Americans, his calm demeanor and reassuring smile symbolized stability in uncertain times. His campaign slogan, "I like Ike," was simple but effective, appearing on buttons, posters, and even toy badges worn by children. Eisenhower's elections reflected a new era in political communication. His team embraced television, airing short campaign ads that contrasted sharply with the longer radio speeches of earlier candidates. The television medium allowed voters to see Ike as approachable, almost like a trusted neighbor. His victories also revealed Americans' desire for moderation. After 2 decades dominated by Roosevelt and Truman, Eisenhower represented balance, strong enough to handle Cold War challenges, yet gentle enough to preserve peace at home. Under his leadership, the 1950s felt less like a time of sharp political conflict and more like a period of cautious optimism. 83. The GI Bill's effects. The echoes of World War II continue to resonate through the GI Bill, signed into law in 1944 but deeply shaping the 1950s. This landmark legislation gave returning veterans access to education, home loans, and job training. By the mid-decade, the results were everywhere. Suburbs filled with neat houses, many purchased with GI Bill benefits, where young families settled into a stable rhythm of life. College campuses swelled with students, many of them first-generation scholars whose tuition was covered by the program. The bill did more than reward service. It expanded the middle class, fueling prosperity and reshaping the nation's social fabric. Families who once expected modest futures suddenly found doors open to careers in engineering, business, or teaching. Children grew up in homes owned rather than rented, with parents who saw education not as a luxury but as a right. The GI Bill was political in origin, but personal in impact, touching millions of households in ways that still ripple across generations. 84. Civil defense drills. While prosperity defined much of the decade, civil defense drills reminded Americans of the ever-present shadow of the Cold War. In schools and offices, sirens would blare unexpectedly, prompting students to duck under desks or adults to move toward designated shelters. Posters taught families how to prepare survival kits with canned goods and water. The drills often carried a surreal air. Children, laughing nervously, crouched beneath wooden desks as teachers insisted the practice was serious. Families leafed through pamphlets describing how to build backyard fallout shelters. For many, the drills created a blend of anxiety and routine, unsettling reminders of nuclear tension tucked into ordinary life. Although historians debate how effective these drills would have been in a real crisis, their cultural impact was undeniable. They embedded the Cold War into childhood memories and daily schedules, shaping how Americans perceived global politics. 85. Flag etiquette in schools. Amid such anxieties, schools also emphasize patriotism through flag etiquette. Every morning, children stood at their desks, placed hands over hearts, and recited the Pledge of Allegiance. Classrooms often displayed the American flag prominently, and teachers corrected any student who failed to show proper respect. In 1954, the words "Under God" were added to the pledge, reflecting both religious sentiment and Cold War ideology. Politicians framed the addition as a distinction between the United States and officially atheist communist nations. In classrooms, however, it simply became part of daily ritual, spoken so often that it blended seamlessly into the rhythm of schooling. Flag etiquette reinforced civic identity. For millions of children, it instilled not just knowledge of citizenship, but also a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. 86. School segregation. Beginnings. But classrooms also revealed one of the most pressing moral and political challenges of the decade: school segregation. In 1954, the Supreme Court issued its landmark ruling in Brown v. Board of Education, declaring that separate but equal schools for black and white children were unconstitutional. The decision marked the beginning of a long, difficult process of integration. While some communities cautiously moved toward compliance, others resisted fiercely. News images of children escorted by federal marshals or parents protesting outside school gates exposed deep divisions in American society. Though implementation would stretch across decades, the ruling ignited conversations in every town and classroom. Political leaders grappled with how to enforce it, while families debated it at dinner tables. The push toward desegregation was both a legal milestone and a deeply personal reckoning, setting the stage for the civil rights movement that would define the 1960s. 87. Alaska and Hawaii statehood preparations. Even as civil rights struggles reshaped the continental United States, political maps were also expanding. The 1950s were the decade when Alaska and Hawaii prepared for statehood. In Alaska, oil discoveries and Cold War strategic importance strengthened the argument that it deserved full representation. Hawaiians, too, pressed for equality, pointing to their economic contributions through agriculture and tourism. Congress debated the merits, balancing regional interests and political implications. By the end of the decade, the momentum was clear. In 1959, both territories officially joined the Union, but the groundwork was laid in the years before. Through campaigns, congressional hearings, and public enthusiasm. For schoolchildren of the 1950s, maps of 48 states soon gave way to the familiar 50-star flag still flown today. 88. Political TV ads debut. One of the most significant changes in politics during the 1950s was the debut of television advertisements. Candidates and parties realized that television had the power to reach voters directly in their living rooms. Eisenhower's 1952 campaign was particularly famous for its short spots, such as the animated "Ike for President" jingle that cheerfully repeated his name while cartoon figures marched in support. These ads bypassed long speeches and instead relied on catchy slogans, upbeat music, and memorable imagery. Critics worried that television reduced politics to entertainment, focusing more on charm than substance, yet the trend was unstoppable. By the end of the decade, no serious campaign could ignore television. Politics had entered the age of the screen, forever altering how candidates connected with the public. 89. NATO's importance. On the global stage, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, grew in importance throughout the 1950s. Formed in 1949, NATO represented a military alliance of Western nations committed to collective defense. During Eisenhower's presidency, it became a central pillar of U.S. foreign policy. American troops stationed in Europe reassured allies, while NATO exercises demonstrated unity against potential Soviet aggression. For ordinary Americans, NATO was both distant and reassuring, an acronym often heard on the evening news, symbolizing safety through strength. The alliance underscored America's role as a global leader. By tying its security to that of Europe, the US embraced responsibilities that went far beyond its borders. 90. UN growth. Alongside NATO, the United Nations expanded its influence. In the 1950s, the UN admitted new member states as decolonization swept across Africa and Asia. Each admission shifted the balance of voices, giving newly independent nations a seat at the global table. Americans followed UN developments in newspapers and on television, often with a mix of pride and skepticism. The organization represented hopes for peace and cooperation, yet Cold War tensions frequently stymied progress. Still, the UN's headquarters in New York symbolized America's commitment to international dialogue. For schoolchildren, model UN clubs and classroom debates introduced global awareness. For adults, the UN was both an institution of idealism and a theater of Cold War rivalries. 91. Expansion of public works. At home, politics also shaped the physical landscape through the expansion of public works. The 1950s saw new highways, bridges, schools, and parks funded by federal and state governments. These projects reflected both practical needs and symbolic commitments to progress. Highways eased traffic congestion and connected suburban families to city jobs. Schools were built to accommodate the baby boom generation, their brick walls and wide windows symbols of faith in education. Parks and recreation areas expanded, offering green spaces for communities to gather. Such public works were political in origin, but deeply personal in effect. They touched nearly every citizen, whether through smoother commutes, safer classrooms, or shaded picnic grounds. In this way, politics entered daily life, not through speeches, but through concrete and steel. Finally, let's return to charming details of fashion and style. Taken together, the political landscape of the 1950s was both steady and shifting. Eisenhower's calm leadership reassured voters. The GI Bill expanded opportunity. Civil defense drills reminded citizens of global dangers, while flag rituals reinforced national unity. Segregation battles revealed painful contradictions in American democracy, even as preparations for Alaska and Hawaii signaled growth. Television reshaped campaigns, NATO and the UN reshaped diplomacy, and public works reshaped neighborhoods. These events were not as glamorous as movie premieres or as thrilling as rock and roll, yet they formed the scaffolding of American life, steady structures upon which culture and daily routine rested. And once the scaffolding was set, people could turn their attention back to the pleasures of ordinary living. Finally, let's return to charming details of fashion and style. Fashion and style in 1950s America. The 1950s were a decade when prosperity and optimism spilled out into clothing, grooming, and self-presentation. After the hardships of the Depression and the restrictions of wartime rationing, Americans embraced fabrics, accessories, and styles that emphasized individuality. The nation's wardrobes reflected both tradition and rebellion, glamour and comfort. Whether in suburban kitchens, bustling high schools, or glittering Hollywood premieres, style choices told stories about who people were and what they aspired to be. 92. Poodle skirts and saddle shoes. Few symbols of the 1950s remain as iconic as the poodle skirt. These wide, swingy skirts, often stitched from felt, featured playful appliques. Most famously, a poodle on a leash, but also records, flowers, or musical notes. Teen girls wore them to school dances, sock hops, or casual afternoons at the soda fountain. The skirts moved beautifully with dance steps, spinning outward during the jitterbug or the cha-cha. Often paired with saddle shoes, two-tone leather footwear with a distinctive dark band across the middle. The look captured youthful energy. White bobby socks completed the ensemble. For many teenagers, the poodle skirt was a uniform of belonging, instantly marking its wearer as modern, stylish, and ready to dance. 93. Zoot suits fading out. In contrast, the once daring zoot suit faded from prominence in the 1950s. Popular among jazz musicians and urban youth in the 1930s and 1940s, zoot suits featured long coats, padded shoulders, and high-waisted trousers with wide legs. By the new decade, however, the style was increasingly associated with an earlier era. Fabric once rationed during World War II was no longer scarce, but post-war fashion sensibilities shifted toward cleaner, slimmer lines. Young men in the 1950s often favored more fitted suits or casual wear instead. While zoot suits lingered in certain subcultures, they no longer held center stage. Their decline marked the transition from wartime defiance to peacetime conformity, as the mainstream embraced subtler forms of personal expression. 94. Leather jackets and rebels. If zoot suits represented a fading past, the leather jacket signaled the rise of youthful rebellion. Inspired by movies like The Wild One, 1953, starring Marlon Brando, the black leather jacket became synonymous with toughness and nonconformity. Teens paired it with white t-shirts and denim jeans, a sharp break from the pressed shirts and sweaters their parents preferred. The look spread quickly, thanks in part to James Dean's brooding image in Rebel Without a Cause, 1955. Motorcycles, jukeboxes, and late-night diners became part of the rebel aesthetic, with leather jackets serving as a badge of independence. While some adults worried about the symbolism, for teens the style was liberating, a way to express individuality in an age of conformity. 95. Penny loafers. Not all footwear screamed rebellion. Many teenagers and college students opted for penny loafers, sleek slip-on shoes that carried a subtle charm. Traditionally, wearers tucked a small coin, often a penny, into the front slot, giving the shoe its name. Loafers were practical and stylish, suitable for classrooms, dates, and casual outings. They matched neatly with rolled-up jeans, pleated skirts, or pressed slacks, bridging the gap between youthful playfulness and grown-up polish. The popularity of penny loafers reflected the decade's balance, a generation experimenting with self-expression but still respectful of tradition. 96. Hat culture in daily life. Throughout much of the 1950s, hats remained a daily staple for men and women. A man might leave the house in a fedora or trilby, tipping it politely to neighbors. Businessmen carried briefcases and wore hats as naturally as ties. For women, hats ranged from elegant pillboxes to wide-brimmed sun hats, often adorned with ribbons or veils. Wearing a hat was both practical and social. It completed an outfit, offered protection from sun or rain, and conveyed respectability. Sunday church services, weddings, and public gatherings nearly always included hats. Though the trend would begin to decline in the 1960s, the 1950s preserved hat culture as a visible marker of refinement. 97. Homemaker dresses. While teenagers experimented with leather jackets or poodle skirts, many adult women embraced homemaker dresses. Often featuring cinched waists, full skirts, and cheerful patterns, these dresses balanced functionality with femininity. Bright floral prints or polka dots brought a sense of optimism into kitchens and suburban living rooms. Aprons became an accessory in themselves, tied neatly around dresses while women prepared meals or hosted guests. The dresses reflected a cultural ideal promoted by magazines and advertisements. The content: stylish homemaker who kept a tidy home. Yet for many women, these dresses also symbolized comfort and practicality, allowing freedom of movement while still looking polished. 98. Rise of cosmetics ads. The 1950s also marked a boom in cosmetics advertising. Glossy magazines showcased lipsticks in bold reds, mascaras that promised dramatic lashes, and powders that created a flawless complexion. Brands like Revlon and Max Factor capitalized on Hollywood glamour, encouraging everyday women to adopt movie star beauty routines. Television further amplified this trend, with commercials presenting cosmetics as essential tools of femininity. For teenagers, makeup became a rite of passage, carefully negotiated between youthful innocence and adult sophistication. Lip gloss and subtle eyeshadow hinted at maturity, while red lipstick carried the allure of full-grown glamour. Cosmetics ads did more than sell products. They sold ideals. They suggested that confidence, romance, and success could all be achieved through the right shade of lipstick or the perfect compact powder. 99. Teen hairstyles. Pompadours. Hair, too, became a stage for self-expression. For young men, the pompadour reigned supreme. Using pomade or hair cream, they swept their hair upward and back into a glossy wave. The look required maintenance. Combs carried in back pockets. Frequent trips to mirrors, but the effect was striking. Popularized by rock and roll stars like Elvis Presley, the pompadour conveyed energy and confidence. It was daring without being as defiant as a leather jacket, making it acceptable across a wider range of teens. For girls, hairstyles included ponytails tied with ribbons, short curls influenced by actresses, or bouffant beginnings that would grow even larger in the 1960s. 100. Hollywood-inspired glamour. Asterisk asterisk. At the other end of the fashion spectrum, Hollywood glamour dazzled ordinary Americans.